Hi, and welcome to a small, medium, at large podcast. I'm your host, Gail Heisen, bringing you intimate interviews beyond normal boundaries. I want to thank all of you for listening, sharing, liking, watching us on YouTube, watching podcasts, and hearing them on Spotify and all the other social media channels. It is now our first show of 2024, and I'm so excited to be entering this next year with all of you. And I want to say that we have a wonderful guest here today named Kim Colella. Kim Colella is a spirit doula. Her mission is to assist others in birthing their most authentic self into the world. Kim has followed her spirit's urging to embrace life in all its complexity. She traveled to Calcutta to meet Mother Teresa. She journeyed to South Africa to witness the AIDS pandemic. She assisted over 25 women in giving birth. She helped others prepare for their deaths. She co-authored Lasting Gifts, Living with Intentions and Dying in Peace, and published her book, Spirit Embraced, a guiding memoir for a life authentic and free, which won a 2019 Nautilus Award and a 2020 American Book Fest Award. Kim received a BA from the College of St. Benedict and a master's in spirituality from Seattle University. She received the 2016 Service Award and the 1992 Decade Award from the College of St. Benedict, and she is the 2010 laureate of the Greater Tacoma Peace Prize. Let's welcome Kim here today. Hi, Kim.
Hi, Gail. Thank you so much for having me.
It's just a pleasure to have you here. I wasn't sure. Oh, we got connected by I believe, another podcast person who suggested that you come on the show. A
Yes.
very, very nice woman. I can't remember her name. Uh,
Sam.
who was it?
Sam.
Oh, Sam. Very, very nice person. So just a shout out to her. Thank you so much for this connection today. I always start my guests off asking them about their childhood and what happened in your childhood. Sometimes people say nothing happened that led me on the path today. Others say it's everything that happened that led me on the path. So I'm wondering what happened in your childhood that's put you on this path that you're on today, if anything.
I would say I'm the seventh of eight children with a 24-year spread between the youngest and the oldest.
Wow.
So my mother had children in the home for 40 some years that she was raising till she was well into her 60s. She was raising children. I was the seventh, and by the time I was born, my dad was in late stage alcoholism.
Mm.
And by the time I was six, he was living on the streets. And then after 3 years on the streets, he watched a friend go through a DT and die. And he knew he wouldn't survive another one himself. So then he got help and lived for 5 years sober before he died unexpectedly when I was 15.
Mm.
And then also a year and a half after that, my mother had a massive stroke, and they didn't expect her to live um, more than 5 years. So at a very young age, death became a companion for me, which is really a big part of my journey because it colors my life. Like, one of my major questions for myself on a regular basis is, if I was to die tonight, what would I regret I hadn't done? Okay, let's get that going. Right. And so I always have kind of one big project that's part of my legacy work. And I have enough of them to last 30 years. So it's not like I'm expecting to, but I always want to be working on those things. So
Mhm.
that's a big piece that set me on the journey. Um, but also because I was the seventh and there was a lot of chaos because of my father's alcoholism, my mom being a single mom of eight children, um, and it being a different time, and things were pretty chaotic. I was babysitting by the time I was eight,
Mhm.
not just for my little sister, but for my sister's children. And she lived 30 minutes away in a trailer. And one was one was 2 and one was a newborn, and I was 8 taking care of them till 2, 3 in the morning. So when I look at that now as a mother, I'm like, what? you know, but it was a different time and it was a different situation. But because of the chaos, um, there was a lot of pain. There was physical abuse, emotional abuse, verbal abuse. Um, some of my older siblings would disagree with that, but we also agree we had different parents because
Yes.
they were born at a different time in my parents' lives. So they didn't experience the same, they were teenagers or older when my dad um, started living on the streets, right? So they didn't have that experience in the same way I did. Um, but during that time, when I was, I think, about 8 years old, after a particularly hard day at home, I woke up in the night and there was this deep presence of love around me. And I knew in that moment that I could have a different kind of life.
And you were 8.
And I was 8. And I gave myself to love that night. Like, I committed to let love be my guide in my life, and that I was going to do what I needed to do to change the paradigm of shame and fear that I was born into to something different. And um, I'm so grateful that I've been able to do that, and that I've had mentors and angels in earth's clothing come into my path and show me a different way to live in the world, to be a parent, to be a wife, to be a partner, to be a business owner, you know, all of these things. I I actually had a Catholic priest in my life who came into my life when I was in the 6th grade, and he just had a mantra for me that he said on a regular basis: Kimmer, there's more to life than the east side of St. Paul. Kimmer, there's more to, and then he took me and other kids all over the United States and Canada and showed us. I'd never seen the mountains before. I'd never been more than 2 hours away from my house before. I'd never seen the ocean. And he took us and he showed us. But then his next mantra was, Kimmer, you got to go to college. You'd make a good nurse. Kimmer, you got to go to college. And so out of the 8 kids, I was the only one to go to college and to graduate from college.
Wow.
Um, and that was because one of my sisters and later in her life took some coursework, but didn't graduate. And I just feel like without his influence in my life, that never would have happened. He
He
took
was
me to the College of St. Benedict and said, this is where you need to go to school. He had a meeting with financial aid um, set up for me. I came home and I told my mom, I want to go to college and I want to go to the College of St. Benedict. And she was making dinner, stirring, and she stopped and she looked at me and said, where do you think we're going to get that money? And I said, well, I met with financial aid today and I'm going to do this, this, and this, and you don't have to pay for anything. I've got it worked out. And so I was able to go on to a private college, to school. And, that changed everything too. It was like my life has constantly invited me into more expansiveness.
And the fact that you were wise enough as a young child to listen to the information that was being given to you by, he might have been a priest, but he sounds also like an angel in priest
Right.
clothing. And I too am grateful, because if I didn't have my Uncle Stanley, who I just lost recently, these
Mm,
people altered our life as children when we've had different traumas that we've gone through. Those little seeds that those people plant or help with makes all the difference in the world. And I'm very grateful to the ones that came into my life at a young age. And I'm really grateful to know that that's where it happened for you, because had he not been there, you may never have gone down the path that you're on. He could be the pivotal change of putting you into a place of education and learning and knowledge that opened up all these future doors for you to help other people yourself in the future.
right.
So what a wonderful
Absolutely.
man that was.
Yeah.
Uh, so I would say that a lot of the experiences you had as a child really did help you to form the compassionate person with understanding that you can be because you'd seen so much at a young age. Would you agree?
Absolutely. And even like, with the homeless crisis that we have in the United States now, which is so much bigger than when I was a child, for me, those people are I know they're someone's father,
Mm,
right? I know this person on the street asking me for money is a beloved or
mm.
was a beloved, right? They're not just a nuisance. They're not there because they want to be or because they're too lazy, right? That there's more behind all of it.
That's it's sort of like I always like to see what I used to hang out in the streets of New York, and there would be, mafia guys and all kinds of crazy people out there. And those are the people I wanted to meet and know because I felt like, no, everyone says be afraid of these people, but I always felt like, no, there has to be a goodness there somewhere, and I want to find
Yes.
that goodness. And I'm really glad to know that, some people think that that's ridiculous. That person on the street is, they're there because that's where they want to be. It's really wonderful to have the compassion and understanding and heart to know that they didn't want to be there. This is where they ended up, but that doesn't mean that's where they would like their life to end, and that there's people out there helping.
And I think it also has allowed me to understand one big mistake or one medium-sized mistake, and that could be me. I spent some time at the women's prison here, volunteering. And the first time I went into the prison, and they you go through all that security, and then you go through a gate and it closes behind you, and you go down, and then another one closes, and with every clang I was like, my breath, and I just thought, one wrong thing, one wrong move, one bad decision, and any of us could be in there. And it's not because we're better, we've made better choices,
Exactly.
but we've also, like, for myself, I feel like, yeah, I've made some really good choices, but I also had an abundance of really good people come into my life, right? So I don't take a lot of credit for it. It's like I knew the only thing I take credit for is knowing to say yes and to grab on when something was offered, right? That's the only thing.
Well, you made good choices.
I made good choices. Yes. And
That's
I don't believe I have the gene for alcoholism
mhm.
because, in high school and college, if I had the gene, I gave it a good go, right? so, so those things too, like, and having been at so many births, I was talking to my son about this the other day, the placenta after the baby's born, the placenta is born, and how red and rich and beautiful, and the tree of life that the veins make. And then being at births where that wasn't the truth, and it was gray, and it was, the woman hadn't had the nutrition, she was smoking, whatever, and looking at that and realizing in that moment that that child, who that was its nutritional source for 9 months, does not come in the world with the same at the with the same gifts, with the same nourishment, with the same strength, resiliency, right? As a child whose mother was eating the best food and making sure she was getting all those vitamins. I remember staring at the list of how much vitamin D I should be getting and how much this and how much, and then saying, oh, if I eat kale, it gets these, and if I eat this, I get these, and trying to just nourish that baby in me so fully, right? And not all children come into the world wanted.
I have to add to your placenta story because I have a thing that I saw my first placenta when I was 10, when my father delivered my youngest brother. And I wasn't in the house when he got delivered, but my father picked us up and brought us over. And when I saw it laying in this tub of, and I thought, what is this fleshy thing there? And I saw the tree part. And all I remembered was, oh, what could this be? Well, to this day now, I have 9 fruit trees on my property that has the placentas of each one of my niece's children. And
Oh.
when they give birth, even though they don't, only 2 of them lived here in California, the rest of my nieces in the East Coast knows that crazy Auntie Gail wants the placenta. So they would save it at the hospital and get a plastic thing, and they got special styrofoam boxes and sent me the placentas frozen. So I kept them in the freezer until they were able to come. Some of them were in there for a year, some were in for 2 years. Because of COVID, we had to wait for 2 of the plantings. And they bring the child, and I have the placenta, and I put on my shamanic clothing, and I do a ceremony, and I explain to them how this gave life to this child, and now we're going to let the nutrition value of whatever's left in it give this nutrition to this tree, that I make a plaque in my little pottery studio with their name on it, and it goes under each tree. So I put on it the year they're born, but the tree is planted when, when they're here. One of the last ceremonies had one of the little guys was, I think he was 3 or 4, and we were finally getting to plant his placenta. He turned into like a little Buddha when we did the ceremony, and his whole family, everybody noticed how he was really into the ceremony. He really got this whole idea. And now some of them are 12 years old or 10 years old, and they're coming and taking the persimmon off the tree or the apple off the tree that I planted with their placenta. So it feels like a really lovely cycle. And I'll be dead and gone, but hopefully my children will stay here, and these kids will still be able to come years later and say, this was my placenta tree. And they all freak out when you hold the placenta and try to show them the beauty of it, but I still do it anyway, and they're all like,
Yes.
But
yes, I was sharing this story with my son who was home for Christmas, who's 25, a week or so ago. I don't know how we got on the stories, but we were talking about how children don't all come in with the same platform of which to build their lives, right? So I was explaining to him, and I said, I can show you pictures of your placenta. I have photos. And he was like, thanks. Good to know about the placenta. Not interested in seeing it. I was like, they're really cool. You should see it. So,
well, these kids all now have, all kinds of color photos and videos of their placenta being planted.
that is so
And they're
wonderful.
standing there next to it. They're, big enough to look at it. So we'll go back to our questions here. And what I'd like to start with is a quick one. And then I'd like to go, I have 2 questions, and then I'd like to talk about your wonderful book. So first off, just in a quick answer, I had never heard the term spirit doula. And I thought, wow, that's a very interesting title. So could you just give an explanation of what is a spirit doula?
Well,
Which
I
you
think
are.
I think I made up the term.
Oh, so that's meant to
I
me.
see
Okay.
other people using it now, but
Uh-huh.
about a decade or so, I don't even know when, you know, I was a massage therapist for 35 years, but that was a small piece of what I did in the world, right? It was my main financial support, but one of the reasons I chose it was because my mission is to be of service to the world in some way.
Mhm.
And being a massage therapist demanded that I didn't work more than 20 to 30 hours a week because it was too physically demanding. So it gave me time and space to do the other things I love to do, or that I felt called to do. So after being at births as a birth doula and being at deaths as a death doula, what I really found that I was being called to do, a birth doula mothers the mother,
Mhm.
They're not doing the medical things.
Oh,
They're mothering, they're making sure that they're supported, that they're witnessed, that give them ideas of different positions to be in, make sure they're drinking enough water, massage their back. Whatever their husband's not doing is what I would focus on, right? Because one support person is not enough for any birth in my mind. So,
yes.
um, and then it's the death doula, just it, being that kind of soul friend to call them forward and to support them in leaving their body, blessing their body, just doing all these things to make that process as easy as possible. And in my coaching work, it's really focused on helping people through transitions, whatever those are:
Mhm.
birth, death, motherhood, right? So I just decided that I was a soul doula because, a spirit doula, because I was really helping people to bring their spirit more fully into the world through all of their transitions, or more fully into their next calling,
Well,
if it was death. So,
I think that's a perfect title. I only recently heard about death doula. The only doula I'd ever heard of was a birth doula. And
yeah.
then when I heard there were death doulas, I said, wow. And then I said, now there's a spirit doula.
Well, and, with a death doula, I love that term because I feel like birth is our first death
Mhm.
and death is our next birth.
The cycle of
And
life.
well, but not only that, but if you think about a baby being in the womb and
Mhm.
all of a sudden everything's changing and this force is pushing them into the unknown. There's no way a baby could imagine what was on the other side, and it must feel like death, right? Because they're leaving this container. And then I believe that eventually our soul is too big for this body, that it's time to expand more, and, that we're called forward, whether we want to be or not, right? However, that is. And that for me, I believe that death is even more expansive. And just as in a baby in the womb, I couldn't imagine all this. I can't begin to imagine what's beyond this,
Mhm.
except that I know it'll be more expansive. That's all I know. So I love the term death doula because it really is about assisting in the birth of the soul to the next realm.
Beautifully said. So I want to go on to our next topic, which I have a little sign I keep up in my house that I got from my friend Randy. And I thought it's a beautiful thing.
Beautiful.
Be proud of your inner being and voice. And I keep it on my fridge or in my office to remind me this because I need to be reminded this. And I thought it would be wonderful for um, if you could explain for our audience what does this mean? What is the purpose of the voice within us all, and how has it served you in life?
So I believe the still small voice within us is the voice of the divine, the holy, the um what's that term? Sometimes my brain does this because I'm still recovering from 2 concussions.
Oh,
Um so all of a sudden it'll be like, what's
okay,
that word? And it's bus or something,
right.
It's not a big word, but our highest self.
Hmm.
I believe it's that quiet voice. It's not the clamoring voices of our culture, of advertising, of the news, of our parents, of our children, all those that want us to do what they think we should be doing. But there's underneath that, if we get really quiet, is this still small voice within that is the voice of our truth. And I really believe that um, my experience has been that voice often sounds very preposterous to me, to my rational mind. Like, what are you talking about? I'm supposed to write a book? I'm not a writer, right? And it just was persistent, right? No, I'm not a writer, And then finally one day I just said, well, what am I supposed to write about? Well, tell the stories that long to be told. Oh, I could do that. And then writing my book, right? So that voice, it leads us to places I think that we can't imagine ourselves going, or that our ego says, oh no, I could never do that. But that voice, if we listen to it, if we give it credence, it'll be persistent and guide us in our life's path.
I agree with you that I think it's the voice of the higher self. And I found that when I don't listen, it's almost like I get smacked. And that has to remind me. And when I do listen, the more that I've listened years after years after years, and let that voice, it becomes a little bit stronger. It's not quite as faint, and it becomes more clearer to me, and I immediately know it's that voice. Listen, even though it said turn right over here, you better do that. And another part of me many years ago would have said, no, I'm not supposed to turn right here. Why would I want to turn right here? I don't have that now. I'm finally, but took my lifetime to finally understand that this is a voice of higher understanding and guidance. And when it comes to you, it's a blessing, and you accept and listen to it. But it's important for us, I think, in doing these podcasts, to reach out to people who maybe haven't gotten to that place yet. And for people like you to share one of the stories on how this voice served you in life. Is there one particular little story you could tell us about where a voice told you to do something and you said, oh, that's crazy, I'm not going to do that, but you went and did it?
Well, the book, Spirit Embraced was a big
Uh-huh.
one. And so imagine my shock when it won a Nautilus Award. And I mean, I just burst into tears because I knew that my friends and family would read it, and,
Mm-hmm.
but to have this outside body that's really well known and respected say this is a valuable book it was just mind blowing for me. It was just mind blowing because I wasn't an English major. I don't consider, I'm still, 3-4 years later, stepping into the
You were
arrangement of
author.
author. I'm an author. It's like, whew. And I would say one recent time that I didn't listen to the voice, because it's easy for me to listen to the voice if it says, oh, take this class or go on this podcast or, take your family to the mountains or something like that. Right. There's a
Right.
lot of that are like, oh, well, okay. Um,
Yeah.
but I heard for a while that I needed to close my practice. And I did not want to close my massage practice because over 40% of my clients had been seeing me for over 25 years, every other week,
Great
most of them.
reputation.
Right. So I'd been through all their beloveds. Why would I want to leave that? Right. So I kept pushing it. And after long COVID and then a car accident and then another accident, which gave me a second concussion while I was alone on an island, I landed on my head. I heard while I was waiting for someone to come help me, you must stop doing massage. I was like, okay, I surrender now. I surrender. I am done. I don't, it's like, okay, we'll make it a little louder, we'll make it a little loud. And then it's like, and I'm not saying that the fall was meant to be, but it certainly was used to make it clear, in that moment when I was so vulnerable and scared, to hear this voice say, you must stop doing massage. And I haven't done a massage since that day. Because I then was like, okay, I'm going to quit resisting because I need to shift this. But that was a hard one to listen.
Mm-hmm. So,
A fun one, if we have time,
yes, go ahead.
is that in my book, I write about in 2003, we lost 3 beloveds in a short period of time. And the third one was my mother-in-law. And after she died, I called my best friend from college and said, would you go to the Oprah show with me? I need to do something fun for my spirit. It's been so much grief this year. And she said, sure. And we had no idea how involved that process is, but we did manage to get tickets, which was following spirit constantly. And then when we were there, I really wanted to go to a second show, but they don't allow you to. But after the show we were at, they asked for anybody who had preteen or teenage children to and who wanted to come to the show the next day to meet with the producer. And my best friend had 4 preteen teenage children. I said, come on. So we went, and long story short, they ended up interviewing me on air, and we got to go to the show. We got to get picked up by a limousine. It was just wild. But on the way home, I was in the Minneapolis airport for a connecting flight, and I was really hungry. I hadn't eaten because I was so nervous about being on the show, and I knew I needed to get some food in me. So I was looking for food, and there was a woman eating a broccoli pizza. And I looked at it, I looked at her, and I said, is that any good? And she said, oh, it's very good. And I said, okay. I started walking away. And she said, well, why don't you sit down and have some with me? I was like, oh, no, I can buy my own food. And she said, well, I'm going to have to throw it out if you won't help me. And I was like, okay. And we sat down, and she started telling me about her life and work. And she was part of the Grameen Foundation and did some really remarkable stuff in the world. And then she said, but my real love is taking women to South Africa and immersing them in the AIDS pandemic. And my mouth said, oh, I could find 10 women to go on that. She hadn't invited me. She hadn't asked me to find it. But this voice came out of me, right? And I'm like, what are you talking about? And, we just kept talking. And then she called me 2 days later and invited me on a call. And, I had a 5-year-old son. It was a 16-day trip to South Africa. We didn't have that kind of cash laying around. And I said yes to going. And I ended up going with 5 dear women friends. I didn't find, there weren't 10 of us, but there were 6 of us from all over the country. And my son had just asked me the other day, well, then how did you pay for it? And I said, I sent out a Christmas letter and told people what I was doing and asked them to surround me in prayer. And if they felt so inclined and wanted to help support the trip, I needed this much money. And I got 7 times the amount of money I needed. And so I took all of it and we gave it to the organizations that were doing the work that most impressed us at the end of the week, at the end of the time. I sat down with 2 of my good friends and we chose which ones we should give the money to, and we delivered it to them. Right?
Well, that's all, and this all had to do with a broccoli pizza. I mean,
right.
If you didn't say something at that moment, that interaction never would have happened. If you didn't say yes.
And it goes way back before that, because I said yes to going to see Oprah. If I hadn't gone to see Oprah, that wouldn't have happened.
Mm-hmm.
If I hadn't gotten on the show, it wouldn't have happened, because I wouldn't have been so hungry. I mean, I wasn't even hungry because I was still nervous, but I knew I was going to get home at 11 o'clock at night and hadn't eaten all day. Like, you got to get some food in you. So there were all these things. And then that led to me being on the board for what was then called the Tacoma Lesotho Connection. Now it's called the Lesotho Connection, which is, Lesotho is surrounded by South Africa. It's a small country. It's called the mountain country. And a young woman was coming to Tacoma for a year to volunteer for a year here from Lesotho. So we ended up being her host family.
Oh, wonderful.
And we talk a couple times a month. We just met with her whole family on New Year's Day over Zoom. She just had a baby, her 3rd baby this week. And I was, in contact through all of that and supporting and loving her through that. And she is my daughter of the heart. And like, that's what spirit does. That's what, when we listen to that higher voice in ourselves, it's like we can't even begin to imagine where it's going to take us.
I have to say, I'm almost finished with a book I wrote called A Small Medium at Large. And I have a publisher that's reading, it's almost done. I have the last chapter. And I have a publisher looking at it. I have to say, it's the same exact story you're saying, like, I didn't even go to high school, so I have zero book writing experience. And what is it that's possessed me to keep doing this? I have no idea, except that I'm supposed to write this and finish it. And listening to you is making me feel like, okay, this is all how it worked out for her. You just keep following what it is, and you'll see what comes from this, instead of the voices I hear of, why would anyone want to read your memoir? You're not famous. Or why would anybody?
Right.
Those are all the same things that come up. So hearing you say these words, I hope is helping listeners out there, but it's also helping me at the same time. I want to
Oh,
thank
thank
you,
you.
because it's a very inspirational story. And I've had a fantasy of being on Oprah's book club ever since she started it. So I know she doesn't even have a book club anymore, and she's not on TV, or I'm not sure what she's doing. But for some reason, I have this fantasy that somehow I have to meet Oprah. And I just love hearing your story like that, to know that, well, hey, it worked out for her. We'll see what works out for me.
Yeah, and when she came in, I got to shake her hand as she walked by. She, she was shook her hand. I was oh my God, I was just so,
And she's a woman who's done so many things to help others, which is the
yes.
same as you. It's just she happens to be famous, but you're doing both the same work. And that you're
Yes.
really peers in that sense. So I'm going to move on directly to your book, because I found it. First of all, I read it from cover to cover. I didn't put it down. And for those of us that have podcasts that they're watching on YouTube, here is Kim's book. I wanted you to see this with her Nautilus Award on it. I I was blown away by the stories and the comparisons of our similar lives, but I want to know now. I know my question, which was why you decided to do this, and it wasn't you who decided, it was your higher self who decided you to write this. So you share all these wonderful exercises in there about things that you've done throughout your life in learning with the many masters and teachers you studied with. There was one particular exercise I was hoping you might share in its entirety, the exercise, because I think it's really important. And it was about the grounding cord, because so many people out there are doing different things, searching and experimenting with different things to reach their spiritual self, or to grow, or to learn. But I don't know that a lot of people, including my own self, I wish I had been taught about grounding cord and how to do that. And it's very simple. And I thought that would be a good thing if we could just explain to the listeners. You sit down in a chair. What is it exactly you do to ground yourself?
Okay. And first, one important piece for me about the grounding cord is I believe in the deepest part of myself that we're the most powerful when our soul is incarnated in our body and not floating around up here.
Mm-hmm.
So often but when we bring it into our body and fully incarnate into our body, that's when we're the most powerful, and the grounding cord helps us to do that.
So how would that exercise begin then?
So the way I begin is that I put my feet flat on the floor. So if I could be lying down and have my knees bent and my feet flat on the floor, or sitting. Most of the time I'm sitting, putting my feet flat on the floor, taking a couple very deep breaths, cleansing breaths. And then imagining the grounding cord for women begins underneath the ovaries. And for men, it's underneath the testes.
Mm-hmm.
So often when we're floating above, the grounding cord's about a half inch, a half inch long, right? But what we really want to do to bring, is to bring that grounding cord. And I guide people to take a breath and then take that grounding cord and bring it all the way down to the floor, through the floor, through the basement, down into the earth, and all the way to the center of the earth. And then to secure the grounding cord to the center of the earth. Some people imagine their grounding cord like the roots of a tree and they bring it down that way, or like a waterfall and they bring it down. My grounding cord for many decades was, that I think they're called a pneumatic tube at the bank where you put your money in and then it goes,
Yes.
it goes into the bank. That was my grounding cord. I put that down there because then throughout the day, things that are kind of taking you out of your center. So maybe you're feeling a lot of anger. I take the anger and I put it down the grounding cord, giving it to the earth so that the earth can transmute it into something that supports herself, right? Or if I'm feeling anxious about something, I take the anxiety and I put it down my grounding cord. I release those things that take me out of my center down to the grounding cord, down the grounding cord to the center of the earth.
And that's something you could do anywhere if you found yourself getting out of center and you were, in a long line in a store and you're getting anxious and people are getting irritated around you. You could do that right then and there and calm yourself and bring yourself back into your center by connecting into the center of the earth.
Yes. Yes.
So I think that'd be a very helpful exercise to remember at those times when we start to lose ourselves and become angry or
Yeah, and it doesn't have to be a long process. Like
Mhm.
sometimes I'm getting in my car and I'm going grounding cord, check,
I
right?
like that. I like that.
Right? It is so often I think we feel like these exercises have to be, we have to make sure the house is quiet. We have to find a quiet place and we gotta, have a half hour to an hour or an hour and a half to do them. But so many of our things can be like this.
And I think the more that you do it, the faster it will come and the more secure you'll feel with the experience of doing it because it'll be familiar.
Right.
I think that's, anyways, that was a very good reminder for me. I'm watching our time here. We're doing really good. I'm wondering about, there was a chapter you wrote about that I loved called Coming Home to a Body I Love, was the title of one of your chapters, which really spoke directly to me. And I was wondering if you could talk about that chapter. I may not be the only one out there that needs help in this area. And the exercise, if you could talk about in celebrating your beauty, is something we should all hear. And I felt like you were talking directly to me, even though I know this is a book for everyone. I felt really, really moved by this particular chapter.
Well, and it ties in with my daughter of the heart, Mary,
Mm-hmm.
because when she was living here, we took her to the ocean for the first time. She had never seen the ocean. She was so excited. Um, but before that, we celebrate Advent in our house, and it's I love sitting in the dark and finding the lusciousness of being of the dark time of the year rather than resisting and lighting everything up really quickly. So when our son was little, I learned from one of my clients, she had an Advent calendar that was a quilt, and every day her children got a little gift in the Advent calendar. So we started doing that. So Mary discovered the Advent calendar, Advent for the first time living with us, and then the Advent calendar. And I had put this hat that was handmade that I found bought from someone. And she she discovered that hat in her pocket of the quilt and she put it on her head and she went into the bathroom and she stood in front of the mirror saying, "Oh, I love this hat. Oh, Mom, I am so beautiful in this hat. Oh, I just love this hat." And throughout the day, she would go sneak a peek at herself again and again with this outdoor hat on, with the same exuberance of how beautiful she was. And I was so startled. I had never heard a woman delight in her own body.
Mhm.
before in my life, ever. And so I just sat there. I was so tickled by her joy, not only in how beautiful she saw the hat, but she kept saying, I am so beautiful.
Mhm.
I am so beautiful in this hat. Oh, I love the color of the hat. It is so beautiful with my skin. Just on and on and on. And I think the reason I started on the ocean is because she wore that hat then when we went to the ocean. But that was a big lesson for me, listening to Mary love her body, love her physical self. I never heard her criticize her body. I never heard her say, I weigh too much, or I don't have enough muscle, or I don't, I have a pimple, or she never critiqued. And I realized, you know, maybe this is a problem of my culture that women are at war with their bodies,
Mhm.
right? That our
Fat
bodies,
shaming. There's so much fat shaming. Uh,
there's fat shaming, there's too skinny shaming, there's too hairy shaming, you know, there's just so much of what we're supposed to look like that's so constricted, right? So the exercise, I I have to like look at it because I know it's one that I just do,
mhm.
that I made up, of appreciating and loving my body. I need to look at it so I can say the most important parts of it. Grounding, I love you. You did it
And
on Tuesday.
sometimes you can't even believe it when it might be your own child, and you see the beauty in them, and you tell them how beautiful they are, and they don't really get that.
Exactly. Oh,
It's
there it is. Page
it's the
140.
hair isn't right, or this isn't the makeup, whatever it is isn't right. And it seems to me I mean, I have the same issue that we really need to love ourselves how we are. And
Yeah.
instead of me looking in the mirror and saying, oh my God, I'm so fat now, I hate this body. I don't want to say I hate my body. I should be looking in the mirror and saying, I love my body. It's the thing that's getting me into the car. It's getting me to the store. It's getting me into to work or clean or whatever it is I need to do. I have this body that's been
And
working for me.
we can always focus on the not enoughness, but celebrating and giving gratitude and even praise. You know, when I had my last accident, I fell on my head and
Mm,
landed right here. And I felt all my vertebrae smash into each other and knew I was really, really, not only had I just given myself my second concussion, which is what I knew initially with the impact in 7 months, but that I'd really, really hurt my spine.
mhm.
And where I fractured my vertebra, those nerves go to the lungs. And so I give praise to my body every day. Thank you. Thank you for protecting my spinal cord. Because had I impacted my spinal cord with that fall, I wouldn't have survived
Mhm.
long enough to get help because those nerves go to the lungs. I wouldn't have been able to breathe. Right. So every day, if I have a little pain or my brain's foggy, I just remind myself, you're upright. You get to be on the planet another day. This is a gift. And this is the vehicle that allows me to stay here in this way. Right. So, that in and of itself, for all of us, right? Whatever things have happened in our life with our body, the fact that our body every minute is performing miracles.
Mhm. And healing. Our body can heal
Healing.
things inside itself.
Yes. But in order for a human heart to form in utero, it has to go through 1.5 million simultaneous processes,
Wow.
right? So just that in itself, I think the fact that I'm even here, any of us are here,
Right.
that all of our hearts have done that to be a functioning human heart so that we could be a viable fetus and then, you know, be born into the world. And that's one of hundreds of thousands of amazing things each part of our body does. Right? So
Mm.
so the with the exercise for the celebrating your beauty, the very first thing is remove judgment and instead take on delight. I take on delight for, I just had my eyes checked and they were at my vision's 20/20. These are readers, but I wear them. I go like this all day. But I was so thrilled that my eyes at this age were 20/20. And I've been sharing that with people because I'm so excited about it. Like, look at these eyes have managed to stay healthy. It's amazing to me.
Mm.
It's just amazing. So removing judgment, replacing it with delight, finding beauty in every seeming imperfection. You know, our bodies as women are different after birth and before birth, but would you really want to give up the miracle of that birth to have the same 20 or 30-year-old body? Right? Just the way that we age. My hair turned gray at a very young age after going to Calcutta and getting a parasite. And but it reminds me of that profound trip I had in Calcutta, India. Why would I want to get, it's like it's a badge of some sort, right? It went from black to white. So to be able to shift the script of it being not enough to it being something really beautiful,
Mhm.
whether if we have stretch marks from being pregnant, if we
Badge of honor.
it's a badge of honor and a blessing that our bellies expanded that wide to bring that child into the world, right? The birth images, of course, are they're very front and forward for me right now because, as I told you earlier, my grandniece just brought a child into the world as we were beginning the podcast. And
What a
then my
blessing.
daughter of the heart, Mary, just had a baby 3 days ago. So this this whole thing of the miracle of birth, there's many more ways that our body uh, needs to be celebrated, but those are front and center for me right now. And then reminding ourselves that we're beautiful. You know, I all of my passwords have an affirmation of some sort. Right?
Wonderful.
Finding ways to weave affirmations of who we are, what we bring to the world, what our hopes and dreams are for ourselves, what we're trying to draw and magnetize to ourselves. I use my passwords for that, or, I put up little notes around the house for that. Little things that we can do to keep affirming that, looking at yourself in the mirror each day and radiating love.
Yes.
Looking at your eyes, if that's all you can look at to see that they're beautiful, trying to take in the totality as much as we can. But if we have to start with just one place we know we won't critique, if it's just the iris of our eye that we can focus on and say, thank you, you're beautiful. And then purge anything that makes you feel less than the incredible work of art you are. So if our clothes don't make us feel happy to put them on, get rid of them. Have fewer clothes, but have ones that you really like. I have a pair of rain boots that make me feel like a kid every time I put them on, right? I love my rain boots. They're orange and then they have a yellow and a green stripe around them. And, they're these little galoshes. And I feel so happy when I wear them. Or today I'm wearing these Our Lady of Guadalupe earrings when I want to keep holy ones close to me,
Mhm.
images, maybe it's the tree of life or whatever. I wear it on my body somehow to stay connected to that.
I have to say that I recently, because I have an issue of never throwing anything away, I have to save everything. And I fortunately have a house big enough to say, I filled it all up in the last 45 years of living in here. And I said,
Yeah.
I need to get rid of a lot of these clothes. And it seemed too monumental to attack two closets full of clothes. And then I said, you know what? Instead of seeing what you want to get rid of, why don't you just pull out what you actually like? and make that pile somewhere, because I don't think that's going to be a very big pile. And then look at the other stuff and say, well, maybe that's what I have to get rid of now, because these are not the things I actually wear or like. But I collect tons of those. And the ones that you really like is just a handful. And it would make it so much easier to open your closet and say, oh, there's my favorite this. Oh, there's my favorite that. And pick which one you want to wear.
And somebody once told me that everything we own, down to a bobby pin or a safety pin, holds a bit of our energy.
Yes. Oh, I
So if we want more energy, get rid of some of our stuff.
get rid of
And then
some.
my husband and I are working right now with the gentle art of death cleaning, the gentle art of Swedish death cleaning. And we're on a 5-year plan to really purge and get our house down to what we love and need. And everything else you get rid of, because when we die, we have one child and they're going to have to figure out what to do with everything.
I thought it might be nice to leave my children with all that work.
You did? Why?
Okay. Now let them clean it up.
Yeah,
I love that term you called. Can you say that term again? The death, what is it?
it's actually a book. It's called The
Oh,
Gentle Art of Swedish Death Cleaning. And it's just a little skinny, it's not big, but it's all about taking care of our stuff so someone else doesn't have to. And as somebody who has helped people get rid of stuff,
I've done a
you
bunch of
know,
that. Yeah, it's a lot of work.
it's a lot of work. And I just, because I grew up with death as my companion, my question is always, how do I love my husband and son,
Mhm.
even when I'm not here, or if I have a stroke or something and I'm not able to function in the same way? How do I make it as easy as possible on them? And trying to do the work now, I hope to live to be 110, but I could die tomorrow. So what can I do to make that as easy as possible?
And the treasures that you pick to leave that you don't get rid of, they know are very, very meaningful. It's not like
Right.
they're going to have to say, oh, did she really like this? Or it will be known that those were the special items you chose to keep. And
Yeah.
that will have more meaning for them.
Plus I took pictures of all of the really meaningful stuff that can't go to Goodwill.
Uh-huh.
And in the captions, and I made a shared folder for my son. And in the captions, it says, you do not have to keep this, but you cannot give it to Goodwill. If you don't want it, see if this person or see if one of my nieces wants it, so that
That's
he knows
great.
why. This was my grandmother's hope chest from Ireland.
Mhm.
You may not give this to Goodwill. Here's family members to check.
I
So it took me 45 minutes to put 60 things on.
That's a wonderful idea.
Yeah.
Because my daughter keeps saying to me, because she's a minimalist, she has just a few items in her closet. She comes in here and she can't handle the clutter I have everywhere, and she says, when you go, it's all going to the dumps. I mean, she says that teasing to me, but I know she means some of it. And that way you don't have to have that wonder. If you say, please feel free to give this away, but give it to another family member or a friend or someone. I think that's wonderful. Great piece of advice.
Yeah.
I
And most of the stuff in the house isn't that important, but there's 60 items that are really treasures to me that
right.
I do not want to go to a thrift store.
Yes, I'm going to share this with my children after I see them later today. We're getting close, almost not yet, but we're almost at our hour, and I still have a couple more intense questions to ask. So if you're okay with it and don't need to leave right now, I'd like to ask just a little bit about, we spoke about South Africa, but I just want to know from your own voice, even though I read this in your book, what it was like for you to go and be in India, have some interactions with Mother Teresa and be in her group, what that must have been like. And also that after reading the different things that challenges you had, whether it was travel or illness or food, I have to say, I've done a lot of travel in the world, and I have these same kind of issues that come up because we're in other cultures and the body isn't ready for the different bacterias and all this. But I was so impressed with how you sailed through it all with such a positive attitude. I don't know that I could have done that so well. Just you mentioning, oh yeah, and I got this parasite, you know what I mean? That would be like, oh, I'd be forever. That's the only reason I've never gone to India. And I was invited by Deepak Chopra when I had dinner with him once. He asked me to join him on a group of 12 people he was bringing to India. And I've regretted that. I said no because I let my fear of bacteria and sickness of India come into my mind and thinking. And then later I said, he's a doctor. He would have been the best person to go with. So if you could just speak a little bit, I have two more questions after that, but if you could just speak just a little bit about the Mother Teresa experience.
Well, I think one of the reasons I could say so positive through it was because it was a lifelong dream to
Mhm.
meet Mother Teresa and to see her work. And so, you know, it was one of those instances where you hear this voice that says, you need to go. You need to go now. And, you know, trying to have everything set up, having to, you know, uh, we have a what's called a L'Arche community in Tacoma. L'Arche is in, I believe, 110 countries. It's a community of people with developmental disabilities and those who choose to live with them as family. And I lived a commitment to that community for over 25 years and have continued to stay connected, but not as deeply as I was for the first 25, just because of parenting, etc.
Mhm.
Um, but I learned that there was, the year I turned 30, I learned that there was a large community in Calcutta built on Mother Teresa's land. And so that was all I needed to know, that it was time for me to go. And I wanted to volunteer in the L'Arche community. They never got the letters asking if I could come. And I just decided, you know, okay, I'm just going to go. So I had written on my calendar for August 31st that I needed $1,400. I think this was in March. And then I went to work, um, paying off all my bills, getting things in order to leave my practice to go for 3 months. The night before, on August 30th, I had less than $200 in my bank account. And I said to myself, driving home from work, I guess I'm not meant to go. But the voice said, just wait. I was like, okay. Went to work the next day. My business partner found a check for me in her P.O. box. I went to the P.O. box. There was a check for me from an insurance company. A man walked in and bought 10 gift certificates from me. And nobody knew I had this. And nobody has ever bought 10 gift certificates from me before or after that. And at the end of the day, I was 82 cents short of the amount I needed. And I had $1 in my pocket and I took it out and I slapped it on the desk and started jumping up and down. I'm going. And Katie's saying, where are you going? I'm going to Calcutta to meet Mother Teresa. You know,
Oh, I
so
get
thrilled.
chills when you said that in my whole body.
And it was one of those things, right? How am I going to get to Calcutta? I'm self-employed. But I'm okay. I'm just going to keep following. And then all of it. And then I enrolled in a yoga teacher training in Nepal because I wanted someone on that side of the world to be expecting me. And it ended up, they never got the message I was coming. But they did let me enroll. And I'd done yoga for 3 hours previous to that in my whole life. So I was doing yoga 8.5 hours a day, left the yoga center after 30 days, feeling so strong and powerful, and then got to Calcutta. And within 24 hours, I had a parasite and was vomiting and the whole shebang for the next year. But when I got to Calcutta, I got a room at the YMCA. And I slept and showered. And then I was going out to find L'Arche, which consisted of 13 people in this huge, massive city where the average vehicle could only go 6 miles an hour because the streets were so crowded. So I'm leaving the Y And the guy behind the desk says, "Oh, where are you going?" And I said, "Oh, I'm going to look for a community called L'Arche." "Oh, I know L'Arche." He knew L'Arche. How would he know L'Arche? So he gave me directions. It took me 2 hours to get there. I walked in. I asked for Mark LaRoche. A man says, "I'm Mark." I said, "Hi, Mark. Have you gotten the letters from me?" And he looked at me like I had 10 heads. And I said, "Oh, well, David Rothrick and I were blah, blah, blah." He said, "Well, come on in and talk to me." And at the end of our conversation, he said, "Kim, we don't allow someone to come into our community for less than 10 months, for less than 3 months." And I'd already used up 6 weeks of my 3 months.
Mhm.
And he said, "But we've been praying for 2 weeks for God to send us someone to help us because we're so short staffed over the holidays. Could you come and live with us too?" And so the next day I moved in. But that was such a having the money come, confirmation, this is the right thing, having meeting them and that they've been praying for someone to show up and they saw me as an answer to prayer, right? Then going on my first day off to the mother house for prayer, and the the volunteers sit on the right side of the room and the nuns sit on the left side of the room, and there's well over 100 nuns, and there's an aisle, and I sit right at the edge of the aisle, so maybe I'll get to see Mother Teresa. And she came in and sat directly across from me. There was nothing between us but that aisle, nothing. And then I didn't pray at all. I just stared at her the whole time because I was so thrilled to be meeting this person whose work I respected so much. Afterwards, they announced that confessions would be available. And I'm Catholic. I grew up Catholic. You know, I only go to certain people for what I call reconciliation, to myself, to God, to whatever, not confession. But I also, it was right before Christmas. It'd been really hard. I'd had this parasite. I left with all the people who were leaving. They left the chapel, they turned left and straight ahead. They went down some steps, but right before the steps was another hallway, and I went down that hallway. You could not see that hallway from the chapel, right? So I'm at the end of that hallway having an argument whether I'm going to go to confession or go meet these two women from Scotland I met that day who spoke English, and they were women. And I was living with 7 developmentally disabled men, most of them who I couldn't understand anything. And out comes Mother Teresa. I was out there like 5 minutes. She could not have seen I was there. She came out, came directly to me and said, "So you're going to confession?" And I said, "Oh, yes, Mother." And she took my arm and she walked me into the chapel, pointed at my head, and said, "The line for confession will form here."
Wow.
And I'm like, what have I ever done that warrants this?
I'd say
And,
a lot.
and then she invited me and 29 other people to come and sit with her on New Year's Eve. And for like 45 minutes, I had this private audience with her sitting right at her left foot, and it was just a dream come true, right? It was something so deeply in me that I wanted to be there. And even though the poverty was overwhelming, and I had spent time in the barrios of Tijuana, I delivered meals to the garbage dumps where people lived in Tijuana. That did not prepare me for Calcutta. And within 2 days, I discovered I had cut off my peripheral vision because I couldn't take it all in. So I only saw what was right in front of me. So I can't remember what the question was, but
It was just to share this experience of meeting.
yeah, it was such a profound experience.
Mhm.
And I learned so much about myself, so much about my limits to compassion, because I considered myself a really compassionate person. And then I discovered where I shut down on that, right?
Mhm.
Looking at the orphan children, I recognized the orphan within me,
Mhm.
and that she needed love and care and nurturing. It was so profound every day there. I learned so, so much.
I always, when I look back on having met certain monks in a monastery or certain different people that I've met, there's something about their, whoever that they are, like whoever that Mother Teresa is, that a transformation happens in myself when I connect to that person, or have, even though we don't speak the same language, even though it may only be 5 minutes, a very powerful transformation can happen in that time because of the being in the presence of someone who's so compassionate, or work so much on themselves, or have done so much spiritual work. So I think that at the same time, you probably were experiencing a transmission, or a, something in connecting with her.
Yeah, and one of the biggest things that I received was that she was so ordinary. She was doing extraordinary work. She has been named a saint
Mhm.
in Catholicism by the Pope. She's now Saint Teresa. I don't call her that. I call her Mother Teresa, or
Mhm.
MT for short. But but that we put these titles on people, and then we think that they're more than us,
Mhm.
that they have some inherent light. Well, we all have that. Maybe some of us, it's been beaten down more,
Mhm.
or some of it's been beaten down, but it's just there waiting to be reclaimed, right? But we all came into the world with light to be shared. And she just followed it. She followed that voice that said, go work with the poorest of the poor.
And she remained herself an ordinary person. She didn't become
Yeah.
an egomaniac that you have to kiss her feet when you meet her because she's such a high holy person. Those are the true, I mean, those are the true spiritual masters, even though we're just calling her a regular, ordinary person. She really was, she really had done amazing accomplishment of things in helping others. Uh, and that's also, I find that those true people will always say, oh no, I'm just a regular, I'm not, there's nothing special. I'm just doing my work.
I'm just doing what I feel called to do.
Very beautiful. Well, we're gonna move on to something else. Getting here to my last, well, a little bit. We're okay in time. I have to talk about the fact that about relationships with men. So we're moving off of Mother Teresa and going into men. And I, like you, was very young when I had my first falling in love with someone. You were 10. I was probably about 11. And I also followed a similar path where people would say, oh, she's boy crazy. She's boy crazy. So I find that we had the similar thing about going into all these relationships, or having these different relationships with men, but they actually didn't serve us in a positive way necessarily. And at some point in your life, you found an amazing, loving, kind man named Nico. And I was wondering if you could just talk a little bit about the difference between him and the other relationships before him, that possibly might help maybe a listener who's maybe torn in the relationships that they've had, and knowing that they need to really move on to something different. And I was wondering if you could say how that happened for you, and how you had a chapter about cutting the cord and cutting the old cord. And I was wondering, is that what opened up the space for Nico to enter your life?
I think what opened up the space for Nico to enter my life was that I got crystal clear
Mhm.
about what I wanted in a partner, and proclaimed for myself, wrote down the list, um, without questioning whether I deserved it, right? Previous, I had dated many men for 5 years, this one for 4, this one for 3, that I knew I would never marry. And the deciding factor of that was always, would I trust this man with a child?
Mhm.
Would I trust them to be the father? Would they be the kind of father I want? Because I knew I wanted children. And if I didn't get a resounding yes, I might, have the on and off relationship with him for 5 years, but I wasn't about to marry him.
Mhm.
Right. And in between those, or on an off time with them, maybe I would date somebody who could be, but they terrified me because I wasn't ready. I had to do my own work. I had to do the work to see, how did my parents' relationship affect me? How did the fact that I did not grow up with a man and woman in love with each other living in the same house? My dad was gone by the time I was 6. I would say to Nico, the first months of our marriage, if we had 5 kids and you left me, I'd know how to do that. I do not know how to do this.
Right.
Because this was an intimacy. And I think one of the most courageous acts we do as humans is learn to love and be loved, especially the being loved. So many of us are good about loving and serving and giving, but to receive, I had to learn how to receive love. I had to do the work to give that to myself. So I was 35 when I got married. I was 35, but it was only a couple months before I met Nico that I made the decision. I was cutting the cords to men who were my just in case. Because I had some good men in my life. I knew they weren't my part. They didn't feel like they were my part, but just in case, if I'm not married by 40, maybe we'll get married, whatever. And so I cut those relationships and allowed myself to stand with no one. Got very clear about what I wanted. And when I met Nico, I went home and wrote a letter in my journal. Are you who I think you are? And I had studied him. It was at a fundraising dance for L'Arche. And he had come in and I thought he looked interesting. And then I got a beer and I sat down and I studied him for 30 minutes and I watched him. I watched him get on the dance floor and have so much fun dancing. I watched him interacting with people with developmental disabilities and treating them the same way he treated anybody else, with the same delight to be with them. And I turned to my friend and said, I want to date with that man by the end of the night. And it was his spirit I fell in love with. That was what I fell in love with, looking at how he treated others. I remember someone once saying, watch how a man treats his mother, because that's how he'll treat his wife. And I was like, oh, interesting. So just watching how he treated others was really important. And having my line I wouldn't cross, that I wouldn't marry someone who I wouldn't want to have a child with, and trust them 100% to nourish that child's soul. It's not that the other men were bad men. They just didn't have that capability that I wanted. And then the men that I did date that did have the capability, I wasn't ready for them. So it didn't last long anyway.
Because it was hard for you to receive the love that they were giving.
To feel like I deserved.
Well, I think this is very good advice. And by sharing these stories, this may help another person who's in a similar situation in relationship. It might give them some clarity. I think it's important to know that it's how many years now that you've been married now?
It'll be 29 years in July.
So it's been, we can say that now we know it truly worked out. It's not like we're wondering what happened.
And that marriage, I believe, is for our soul's growth. And so it's not a tra-la-la experience.
Never.
And, I grew up in an era, and probably you did too, where the movies ended and books ended, and then they lived happily ever after. And, that's the biggest lie. It's like, no, marriage is hard at times.
You have to work
because and you're taking each other to your edges, because that's where you grow. And we're with that person for our soul's growth. And so it's intensely beautiful and difficult. But I respect him. I love him. I enjoy him. And I feel so grateful to get to live my life with a man who is so kind and good.
Well, I'm hoping that any of the younger people listening to this who feel frustrated that there's nobody out there for them will be inspired by that story.
Thank you.
I have just, I realize we're a little over our hour, and I just have a couple of this is the last, I don't want to keep you too long, but okay. Okay, so there was two other things, and then I'm truly finished with my questions. This is just a small little thing that I just wanted you to mention to people, because I think it's a wonderful thing in changing those voices or thoughts in our head. And you wrote about in your book about healing, and you use this statement to yourself about that's a healing story. And I know when I go down a negative path, and it may be I like when you refer to it about the body or health, that you say, wait a minute, that's a story that doesn't need to happen. I think this is great advice. And so you have something that you say to yourself when those things come up, like, oh, do I have a pain over here? Does that mean I've got lung cancer now? When that comes up, what is it that you've taught yourself to do in that condition?
Well, and I was taught it by Angeles Arian, who was a fabulous, what was her title? What's coming up as archaeologist, and that's not what she was, but it starts with an A.
I don't know. I'm studying with one of her students right now in sound healing. And the things she has taught him that he's been teaching me, I wished I would have attended one of her workshops or met her once, but
she's so wonderful.
Teacher.
And she said this over and over. It was an all-day workshop and many times through the day, right? And she talked about how many of us have these catastrophic stories that go through our head, right? And I just really experienced this while my son was home, and when he was out at night with his friends, and he wanted to walk home, and I'm like, oh, he's walking home. We live in the inner city, and I'd start, and I'm like, you don't stay up all night worried about him when he's back home at his home, but we just have our triggers, all of us. And so I would have this catastrophic story happening of him walking alone and something horrible happening, right? And then I would say, well, that's a story that doesn't need to happen. Now that's a story that doesn't need to happen. Now that's a story that doesn't need to happen. Very important to say it 3 times. She would say it 3 times over and over. And then she instructed us, and this is what I do. Then I would imagine him coming home, getting up in the morning, telling us all about how much fun he had the night before. Well, now that's a healing story.
Yes.
Now that's a healing story. Now that's a healing story. So always replacing it, right? With the best case scenario of what you want it to end up being, and putting the energy there instead of your fear.
Because when you feed the fear, it grows more and more. And then you're on sort of a roller coaster of fear, and then panic sets in, and nothing has even happened. All you've had is a thought.
Right. And you're living that thought. Right?
Yes. And
so she would talk about changing the channel, or lifting up the needle on a album and changing it to the next song, right? But not to allow that song, that mindset, to keep going and going and going over and over again.
Well, I think that's a very valuable thing, and I like and I'm going to try this myself and say it's exactly that way. Now that's a story that doesn't need to happen. And get rid of those, something they call them the Jewish mother fears or whatever it is. And I always escalate. And exactly with my children, wait, they didn't get home, even though they're grown adults now, I'm going to still have those. And it's much better to have, oh, they're having so much fun, that's why they're not back yet. That's a much better.
And then imagining our conversation over breakfast in the morning, and laughing together and having fun, right? So that I really spend a lot of time like imagining that, so that it's louder and more clear than what the fear was imagining.
Yes.
Imagining the best outcome.
Very good, positive way to view thoughts that are coming inside of us. So I'm finally on my last question, number 7. And it's let's see, I have three, it's the three parts, but it would be one answer, I think, for this. And then we can, if there's any other words of wisdom after we finish this, it's up to you, but I'll have finished all my questions. Are you currently still involved with any of the teachers you have studied with over the last 40 years? And if so, who would that be? And are there any teachers you would suggest our listeners check out? I know Angelus Arian is one. Are there any teachings that stand out at this time that you wanted to share with our audience? And that would be my conclusion and last question.
Oh my goodness. Um, well, I still read some of them. David Spangler taught the first two courses that I took in my master's program in Seattle U, and he's a New Age philosopher and one of the holiest beings I've ever met.
Mm.
I just adored watching him teach. I would drive home every single day with fireworks going off in my head. And he doesn't teach as much now. And so mostly I read his newsletter and just kind of keep him alive. I still study whenever I can with Jean Houston,
Oh, how
who's,
wonderful.
considered the grandmother of the humanistic psychology,
Hmm.
and I just was able this year to take two courses with her that were only 13 people in each course. So that was really lovely. And there's something about Jean that I feel like, and I told her this, you are who I imagine my mother would have been had things been different for her. And so there's just this connection with her that I always feel like I'm I'm just sitting with a mother figure or a grandmother figure for me. And I just love her work. She gives me so many different exercises I can use. So Jean Houston, David Spangler. I just completed my studies with Daphne Michaels, who combines psychology, quantum physics, and spirituality.
Mm.
She runs the Vibrational Health Institute here in Tacoma, and so I just completed that because I needed a little more spaciousness. It was time to shift for a while. I hope to go back and learn from her some more again one day. I stay connected to all the teachers. Nancy Rebecca here in Tacoma, who's intuitive and has the Intuitive Mind Network. And many of my friends that are local from Daphne's classes have become teachers for me, supports. Um, they're shamans and they're psychologists and they're just really rich beings. So I just keep reaching out and discovering new people, and just want to continue to sit at the feet of masters, whether it's on a Zoom class or um, in person.
That's also a valuable piece of advice, that it's always good to keep engaging. It's not that we need to just say, oh, I found this right person and this is it for me, or anything like this. It's very nice to be stimulated by all the different people, and they don't have to be a famous person. They can be
Right.
someone you meet in your class who's very stimulating to be with, and very inspirational and very spiritual.
And does this to our mind, right?
Yes.
And I would say, and I write about this in Spirit Embrace, that as I got closer to knowing I was ready to get married, I wanted children, I surrounded myself with couples that I felt were masters in the art of parenting, so that I had a new vision of parenting. That just, watching them parent was just mind blowing for me, because it was so different than how I'd seen parenting done before. So much more loving, respectful, caring, compassionate for the child than I had ever imagined. Um, so, whatever it is we're trying to develop in ourselves,
Hmm.
to find people, and it doesn't have to be people we're paying, it can be people, right? Like finding these parents in my friend groups, my community, and saying, I want to be like them. I wanted, I want that to become my normal. And in order for it to become my normal, I have to see it over and over. It has to be the baseline of how things are done.
I think that with parenting and when you're looking at relationships, those were very good mirrors to show you something you didn't learn when you were growing up.
Right.
And we all have those in different, whatever the different matters of it are, we all have those kind of situations. And that's a really good way to learn and heal from it. I, was she in your area, Jean Houston? Is she in Washington?
No, she's down in Ashland, Oregon.
She's in Oregon. Okay. I've
But
seen,
whenever she comes up this way, I try, if she's doing a workshop or something,
right,
I'm there.
you're there. I'm gonna have to, I definitely want to go to one. So I want to thank you for being here, and I just want to know if there's anything else that you'd like to tell the audience before we say our goodbye.
Just, I think what I'd like to say is just keep following love.
Mhm.
Not the romantic vision of love, but that which is loving to yourself first and foremost, and which calls you into loving others more deeply and freely, and to receiving love more fully. And for me, love is always expansive. It does not contract me, it opens me up. And so that's my invitation for others.
Well, thank you. That's not only a beautiful invitation, it's a beautiful thought to think of in starting this new year of 2024,
Yeah.
to start it in love.
Yeah. And especially in love with your own being.
Yes. Well, I want to thank you so much for being here with us today. You're in Tacoma, Washington. I'm down here in California. And I want to thank all our listeners for subscribing, for liking, sharing. And I love having your comments. So we look forward to all of that. I want to thank my children because they're the ones who produce and post my podcast for me. And I'm very grateful to them for that. And I want to thank my husband for all the support he gives me when I do my writing. And I want to wish everybody a wonderful, healthy, happy year ahead. And I hope you enjoy all the upcoming shows. We have some more exciting guests, but a wonderful guest that we had today with Kim, kicking off the year in a positive way and filled with love. So thank you. And remember, listeners, share your stories because stories can heal. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Gail.